All right, let's dive in. If you're here, you're probably looking to explore the Buddhist path to awakening, specifically conviction, concentration, and discernment. Right?
You got it. And luckily for us, Thanissaro Bhikkhu's Wings to Awakening breaks down 37 factors leading to enlightenment. Think of this deep dive as like your cheat sheet to how the mind works on its way to true insight.
That's a great way to put it, like a backstage pass to understanding how it all works.
Exactly. The source material draws heavily on the Pali Canon, those earliest Buddhist scriptures.
So we're going right to the source.
Direct to the source.
Love it. So we'll unpack how these three elements, conviction, concentration, and discernment, all intertwine. Like, what are the pitfalls, and why is mastering them like training for a mental marathon where the prize is ultimate freedom?
You ready to get started?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
All right. Conviction, in this context, it's not just believing something.
Okay, so more than just a hunch or a feeling.
Yeah, it's like you're actively committing to understanding this principle of karma, cause and effect, right? How actions and consequences are linked.
I'm starting to see the distinction here. You're placing deep trust in that cause and effect process.
Yeah.
Even when the path gets tough.
Exactly. And Thanissaro Bhikku, he emphasizes 3 interconnected aspects of conviction.
3 aspects.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear them.
First one is social. Surrounding yourself with what the text calls good people.
It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right. And if those people are, committed to the path,
yeah,
their influence can really help keep you on track.
Their dedication can be contagious.
Exactly.
And the text even tells you how to spot these good people.
Oh, yeah.
They say these folks don't criticize generosity or renunciation or taking care of your parents.
So they embody those positive qualities themselves.
They walk the walk.
Exactly. Making them great companions on the path.
Excellent companions. All right, what's the second aspect of conviction?
So the second one is intellectual. It's about understanding the Dhamma, but not just as words in a book.
Right.
It's like qualities that you got to develop in your heart and mind.
Like lived experience, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Imagine you're learning to play basketball. You can read all the books, but without actually playing.
Yeah.
And getting coached, you'll never master the game.
Right.
Same with the Dhamma. You need both the knowledge and the doing.
The practical application.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got social, we've got intellectual.
Yeah.
What's the third?
The third one is, the practical aspect.
Putting it into act.
Exactly, walking the walk.
Yeah.
Even when it challenges you,
Stepping outside that comfort zone.
Yeah, right.
So genuine conviction shows up in how consistently you practice, prioritizing the path over like instant gratification.
Because it's easy to say you believe in something, but much harder to actually live, right? Especially when it takes effort, discipline.
You got it.
So true conviction, it's not passive.
It's this active choice we make every day to align our actions with our beliefs, even when it's tough.
Absolutely.
This makes me think about mundane right view.
Okay.
Accepting those basic Buddhist principles, karma, rebirth, possibility of liberation.
Right.
Accepting these as true, sets a solid intellectual foundation for going deeper.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like laying the foundation for a house. You can't build a strong structure without a solid base.
It reminds me of that analogy in the Dhammapada about the fool and the perceptive person staying with the wise person.
Yeah.
Only the perceptive one, they really benefit from the wise person's teachings because they're open, right, receptive.
They can really hear what's being offered.
And the text says meditation is key to becoming that perceptive person.
That's interesting.
So by meditating, we kind of refine our minds.
Right.
We become more receptive to the wisdom of the Dhamma.
It's like training the mind to become fertile ground for those seeds of understanding to take root.
Love that.
Yeah.
All right, so shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
Let's explore concentration.
Okay, yeah.
It's like taming what the text calls the inner wilderness of the mind.
Yeah, like a wild jungle in there.
Wild jungle. That sounds a bit daunting. What are the main obstacles on that path?
The 5 hindrances.
Okay.
Sensual desire, ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety, and uncertainty.
Whoa. It's a recipe for mental chaos.
It can feel like an uphill battle. And those hindrances, they're kind of like intermediate levels of greed, aversion, and delusion.
Oh, the root causes of suffering in Buddhist thought.
Exactly.
But here's the tricky part. These hindrances, they can disguise themselves as normal, everyday stuff.
They can. It makes them hard to even recognize.
We might be stuck in their grip and not even realize it.
Like being stuck in quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink.
And the text actually uses a different analogy for this.
Oh, does it?
It uses the image of a bowl of water that's been muddied by impurities.
I see.
The impurities are the hindrances. They're distorting our perception, making it hard to see clearly.
That makes sense.
So these hindrances sound like a real challenge.
Mm.
What advice does the source material give for dealing with them in our own lives?
Well, the text gives us a few practical techniques. Like one of the biggest is replacing those unskillful thoughts with skillful ones.
Instead of dwelling on anger towards someone,
Right.
you could focus on their good qualities or, like, think about the downsides of holding on to that anger.
Exactly. It's about actively shifting your focus,
Yeah,
towards something wholesome.
makes sense. What else?
Another technique is like contemplating the downsides of giving in to things like sensual desire.
To see them for what they are.
Yeah, fleeting and ultimately unsatisfying.
Right.
The text also talks about just ignoring distractions.
Letting them come and go without getting hooked.
Yeah.
I bet that takes practice.
It does. It does. It also talks about relaxing tension. When we get caught up in these hindrances, often it shows up as physical tension in the body.
Yeah.
So by consciously relaxing, you ease the grip of those mental states.
Recognizing the mind-body connection.
Yeah.
Using it to our advantage.
Exactly.
What else?
Sometime as a last resort, you might have to use mental force to just push the thoughts away.
But that's not the ideal approach, right?
No. It's more like a Band-Aid than dealing with the underlying wound.
Okay, so more about developing skillful ways of working with distractions.
Right.
Rather than brute forcing them out. Cultivating clarity and stability.
That's it. And speaking of training, let's talk about the two basic types of jhana. The text mentions those.
All right.
Form jhana and formless jhana.
Those are those progressively refined states of meditative absorption.
Yeah, they can be incredibly helpful on the path.
So form jhana, what's that all about?
So form, you can think of it in two ways. One, it can refer to your physical body.
Okay.
So form jhana, in this sense, involves focusing on the sensations of your body from within.
Got it.
The other way to think of form is as the visible forms or light. Some meditators see these in their mind's eye.
Oh, so like mental visualizations.
Exactly. And both these types of form jhana, whether it's focused on the body or mental images,
Right.
they eventually lead to a perception of beauty or radiance.
Interesting. I can see how this connects with that feeling of radiant awareness that, permeates the body in the fourth level of body-focused form jhana.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
It's amazing how these practices lead to these profound shifts in perception.
And the sense of beauty or radiance, it actually serves as a bridge to the formless jhanas,
Okay.
which are states of absorption in increasingly abstract concepts.
Formless jhanas, those sound a bit mind-boggling. How do you even describe something that's formless?
The text describes them as progressively more subtle.
Okay.
First, there's the perception of infinite space,
Okay.
then infinite consciousness, followed by the perception of nothingness.
Whoa. We're getting pretty deep here. It's like peeling back layers of reality to get to something more fundamental.
Yeah.
So what's the final formless jhana then?
The final one is described as neither perception nor non-perception. It's a state that goes beyond even the most subtle mental labels or distinctions.
That's a truly transcendent state.
Yeah.
But you mentioned before that, full mastery of jhana, whether it's form or formless,
Right.
it's not strictly necessary for awakening.
Right. It's an important nuance.
That's a bit surprising.
Yeah. Think of it like physical exercise. You don't need to run marathons to be healthy. But training for a marathon can lead to incredible strength
Right.
and resilience. It's similar with jhana. It's a powerful tool, but not the only path to awakening.
So it's like having a powerful engine in your car.
Right.
It can get you there faster,
Yeah.
but you can still reach your destination with a less powerful engine
Yeah.
if you're patient and persistent.
Exactly.
This makes me curious about how we actually train for this, like mental marathon.
Okay.
The source material breaks down those steps of breath meditation, right?
It does. It provides a really clear roadmap for breath meditation, outlining 16 steps in total.
16 steps.
16 steps.
Okay. Like a step-by-step guide for, training your attention and cultivating these deeper states of concentration.
That's exactly it.
Okay, so walk me through those first few steps. Where do we begin?
All right. The first two steps are all about setting the stage. So you begin by just directing your attention to the breath,
Right.
observing it in the present moment
Okay.
without judgment or manipulation.
So no fancy breathing techniques.
No, not yet.
No visualizations. Just simple awareness of your natural breath.
Exactly.
It sounds deceptively simple.
It is.
But I bet it's more challenging than it seems.
You're right. It's about cultivating this gentle but persistent attention.
Okay.
Then the second step is about evaluating the breath,
What do you mean?
like noticing whether it's long or short.
Okay.
But again, without trying to control it.
So becoming familiar with the breath's natural rhythm.
Exactly.
Okay.
You're starting to train your attention to be more subtle, more refined.
Awesome. And then,
And then things get a bit more intentional.
okay.
Step 3 is about consciously expanding your awareness. So you're encompassing your entire body as you breathe in and out.
So that's where intention comes in.
Right.
You're not just passively observing anymore. You're actively working with your awareness
Exactly.
to create that more expansive and embodied experience.
Yes.
Love it. And as we progress through these steps, you might start to experience those deeper levels of concentration, those jhanas.
Right.
The text uses those interesting similes to describe the different levels. For example, the second jhana.
Yeah.
It's compared to like a ball of bath powder absorbing moisture.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it really brings it to life.
Yeah.
It's like the body's becoming infused with peace and tranquility.
Like a dry sponge soaking up water.
Exactly. Those similes make those abstract states of mind more like tangible, relatable.
For sure.
What happens as we keep going through those steps?
Well, you'll notice a shift. You go from external distractions to more internal ones. Early stages, it's all about dealing with noises and distractions from the outside world. But as you go deeper,
Yeah.
the real challenge becomes the chatter of your own mind.
So we're moving from quieting the outside world
Right.
to calming the inner storm,
Exactly.
those thoughts and emotions.
That's it. And that's where those techniques for overcoming the hindrances become even more important.
Those methods we talked about for dealing with unskillful thoughts, replacing them with skillful ones, contemplating the downsides,
Right.
ignoring them, relaxing.
Yeah.
And as a last resort, using mental force,
Right.
they become essential.
They do.
So it's not about like just blocking out the noise of the world. It's about quieting the chatter of the mind itself,
Exactly.
cultivating that sense of inner stillness,
Yeah.
peace.
That's it.
But we talked about how jhana can be helpful,
Right.
but not strictly necessary for awakening.
Right.
That makes me curious about, the different ways concentration can be used on this path.
Yeah, it's helpful to clarify that. The text actually outlines 4 possible uses of concentration.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is simply enjoying the experience of jhana.
Okay.
It's about finding pleasure in the present moment, like in that state of stillness and clarity.
It's like savoring a good meal or enjoying a beautiful sunset.
Exactly.
It's a source of contentment in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. It is. What about the second one?
Okay, what about the second use?
The second use is about attaining knowledge and vision. This refers to developing those, supernormal powers that can come through deep meditation.
You mean like clairvoyance and telepathy?
Yeah. They can be remarkable, but the text warns against getting attached to them.
Right, because they can become a distraction from the real goal.
Exactly. It's like getting a glimpse of a beautiful landscape on a journey, but not getting so caught up
Yeah,
that you forget where you're actually going.
exactly. All right, what's the third use of concentration?
Okay, third use is about cultivating mindfulness and alertness.
Okay.
This is about developing the ability to see your experience clearly.
Objectively.
Yeah, without getting tangled up in the content of your thoughts and feelings.
It's like developing this inner witness.
Exactly.
Observing without judgment, without attachment.
That's it. And finally, the fourth use. This is the one we're most interested in for today's deep dive.
Right.
It's about ending mental effluence.
And mental effluence.
Yeah, those mental states that, cloud the mind and lead to suffering.
You're talking about greed, hatred, and delusion, right?
That's exactly.
Those root causes.
Yeah, and this is where discernment comes in.
Okay.
It's about seeing the true nature of reality,
Right.
particularly the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and not self.
So it's like taking off those colored lenses we've been wearing our whole lives and finally seeing the world as it really is.
You got it. Discernment goes beyond intellectual understanding.
Okay.
It's about directly perceiving the truth of these teachings.
In your own experience.
Yeah.
That makes sense, but I'm a little confused about how concentration and discernment relate. Sometimes jhana is presented as like a prerequisite for discernment.
Right.
And sometimes it's the other way around. It seems a bit contradictory.
It can seem that way.
But
But the text explains this apparent contradiction. It emphasizes that concentration and discernment, they're mutually supportive.
Oh, so they work together. each one strengthening the other.
Yeah, they're like two wings of a bird,
Okay.
allowing it to soar.
So they work in tandem, but the starting point might be different depending on the individual, right?
Exactly. Some people might find it easier to develop concentration first, while others might be drawn to understanding and discernment.
It's about recognizing your own tendencies and working with them.
Exactly. But in the end, both concentration and discernment are necessary to achieve awakening. The text is very clear that neither one alone is enough.
It's like trying to bake a cake with only flour or only eggs.
Yeah,
You need both ingredients to get the result you want.
exactly.
This makes me think about the whole debate around jhana.
Yes.
Some interpretations of Buddhism, they say that it's not even necessary for awakening. Right?
Yeah.
Like the whole dry insight thing.
Yeah.
The idea that you can achieve liberation just through insight without those deep states of meditative absorption.
That's one view out there. But the source material we're looking at, it specifically refutes that idea.
Okay.
It says that even stream entry, the first level of awakening, requires jhana, requires right concentration.
So no shortcuts. No bypassing the need to develop concentration.
Right. You got to put in the work, the mental training, to cultivate those states of clarity and stability.
And the text makes a strong case for why jhana can be so helpful in developing discernment.
Right.
It describes jhana as like a laboratory
Okay.
for understanding karma and dependent co-arising. It allows you to slow those mental processes down, observe them with incredible precision.
Almost like watching a film in slow motion.
Yeah, to catch all the subtle details. So it's like you get this front row seat to the inner workings of your mind, right?
Right.
Seeing how those thoughts, feelings, and actions, they all arise and pass away in this constant flow.
That's it. And as you observe these processes, you start to see how clinging to any experience, even seemingly good ones,
Yeah.
it always leads to suffering. You realize that even the most refined states of pleasure or equanimity are still impermanent,
Okay.
ultimately unsatisfying. And that realization is a key insight on the path to liberation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about seeing through this illusion of permanence,
Right.
realizing that everything is always changing.
Exactly.
This makes me wonder about how this all connects to the final steps of breath meditation. How are those described in the source text?
Well, stay tuned. That's where we pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait. Welcome back. Last time, we left off with this fascinating image of jhana as a mental laboratory where you can observe the mechanics of your mind in action, almost like watching a movie in slow motion.
It's in those deeper states of concentration that discernment really starts to blossom.
So it's not just about silencing the mind. It's about using that stillness to gain these deep insights into the nature of reality.
Exactly. And that's where discernment really shines. You know, it goes beyond just intellectually understanding something.
Right.
It becomes this direct experiential knowing. You're not just reading about it, you're tasting it for yourself.
You mentioned earlier the 3 marks of existence being key objects of discernment. Can you remind me what those are again?
Sure. The 3 marks of existence are impermanence, suffering or stress, and not self.
I have a feeling those are concepts worth spending some time with.
Definitely. And they're not just abstract ideas. These are fundamental truths about the nature of reality, and they can be directly experienced through mindful observation.
So it's about recognizing how these 3 marks are present in everything, in every single moment.
Exactly. It's seeing that even seemingly pleasant experiences still have this undercurrent of impermanence, stress, and this lack of a solid self. Your body, feelings, thoughts, they're all in constant flux.
That sounds like a pretty radical shift in perspective. How do we even begin to cultivate that kind of discernment?
Well, the text suggests that concentration practice lays the groundwork. It's like developing this powerful mental microscope that allows you to examine the subtle workings of your mind.
So as we refine our concentration, we develop the ability to observe these subtle truths, the impermanence, the suffering, the not self. It's like we're training ourselves to see what's always been there but hidden in plain sight.
Precisely. Remember those 5 methods for dealing with unskillful thoughts during meditation that we discussed earlier?
You mean replacing them with skillful ones? Contemplating their drawbacks, ignoring them, relaxing tension, and as a last resort, using mental force.
Those very same methods can be applied to cultivating discernment. So you can replace thoughts that are rooted in attachment to self with thoughts of impermanence, for instance. Or instead of getting swept away by craving, you can contemplate the drawbacks of clinging to things that are constantly changing.
That's interesting. So it's like using the same tools we've developed for concentration, but now we're using them to gain insight into the true nature of reality.
Exactly. And, the text actually makes this interesting distinction between two levels of discernment.
Two level.
Yeah, mundane and transcendent.
I'm curious, what's the difference between those?
So mundane discernment is about using your understanding of the Dhamma to make, skillful choices in everyday life.
So it's like taking these profound teachings and using them to navigate the ups and downs of daily life.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that cause and effect is always at play in your actions and choosing those actions that lead to well-being for yourself and for others.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about transcendent discernment? That sounds a bit more, transcendent.
Transcendent discernment is about seeing through that illusion of self.
Okay.
Penetrating the ultimate truth of reality.
It's like waking up from the dream of a separate, independent self.
Yes. And the text suggests that this profound awakening can only come through deep meditation practice, through cultivating both concentration and insight, working in harmony.
Because it's in those deep states of absorption that we gain the clarity and stability to see reality as it truly is, not clouded by our preconceived notions and our habitual patterns.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about concentration and discernment being like two wings of a bird, each one supporting the other?
Yeah, it's like a two-way street.
This interconnectedness is especially evident in those later stages of breath meditation,
Okay.
where the focus shifts from calming the mind to actually using that calmness as like a launching pad for insight.
So you're taking that stability and clarity cultivated through the earlier stages of practice, and then you're directing it towards a deeper understanding.
Exactly. And as your discernment deepens, it actually feeds back into your concentration practice. It creates this powerful, positive feedback loop.
It's fascinating how those two qualities, the concentration and discernment, how they support and enhance each other, like a dance between wisdom and clarity. One of the most interesting aspects of discernment, to me, is how it relates to that concept of not self.
Yeah.
That's one of the most fundamental and yet most challenging teachings in Buddhism, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it's often misunderstood. People think it means there's literally no self, that you don't exist.
Right.
Which can sound kind of bleak and nihilistic.
Doesn't it sound like we're just erasing ourselves?
But the text explains that not self isn't about denying that you have experiences.
Okay.
It's about seeing that there's no permanent, unchanging entity behind those experiences. There's no solid me that's calling the shots.
So it's not about annihilating the self, but rather seeing through the illusion of a separate, independent self.
Precisely. The text uses this really interesting analogy of a chariot to illustrate this point.
A chariot.
Yeah. Imagine a chariot. It's made up of different parts, right?
Yeah.
The wheels, an axle, a seat, reins.
Okay, I can picture it.
Now, you could point to any one of those parts and say, that's the chariot. But none of those parts on their own is the complete chariot.
Right. It's the combination of all those parts that makes up the chariot.
Exactly. In the same way, our experience of self is made up of various parts. Our body, our feelings, our thoughts, our perceptions.
But none of those parts, on their own, is the complete self.
Right. And when you really examine those parts closely through the lens of discernment, you realize they're all impermanent. They're constantly changing, arising and passing away moment by moment like a flowing river.
So there's no solid, unchanging entity behind those parts. No me that's separate from those ever-changing processes.
That's a great way to put it. There's no chariot essence.
Right.
No separate entity that exists independently of the parts.
And once we see this truth, it seems like it would have these huge implications for how we relate to our experience.
Absolutely. If there's no solid self, then there's nothing to cling to, nothing to defend. That realization can be like this doorway to profound freedom and peace.
Because we're no longer caught up in the drama of self, right?
Exactly.
That constant striving and grasping that creates so much suffering.
That's it. And the text actually describes these various stages of insight that can arise as your discernment deepens.
Stages of insight. What are those like?
It starts with a gradual weakening of that belief in a solid self.
Okay.
You begin to see the impermanence, the insubstantiality of your own experience, like a mirage shimmering in the desert.
So you're starting to see those cracks in the facade of the self.
Exactly. And as that insight deepens, there can be periods of fear and anxiety,
Right, because it can be unsettling to let go of that familiar sense of self that we've been clinging to for so long.
Yeah, like stepping off a cliff into the unknown.
That makes sense. It's a natural reaction to have when that familiar sense of reality gets shaken up.
And the text emphasizes how important it is to just keep going, to trust the process. It's like riding a roller coaster. There might be some scary moments, but if you just hold on tight and trust the ride, you'll eventually reach a place of exhilaration and freedom.
That's a great analogy. So even though there might be bumps along the way, those feelings of fear and anxiety, they eventually give way to something
Well,
else.
they do. They give way to this growing sense of equanimity and peace because you're starting to taste that freedom that comes with letting go of the illusion of self.
It sounds like a gradual process of letting go,
Mm.
of surrendering to what is.
The text describes this one stage of insight called equanimity towards formations.
Okay.
And this is when you start to see all phenomena, all experiences as just arising and passing away without judgment, without attachment.
So it's like watching clouds drift by in the sky, right? You're not trying to hold on to them. You're not trying to push them away. You're just observing their movement with a sense of calm acceptance.
That's a beautiful analogy. And as that equanimity deepens, it matures into this state of knowledge and vision of liberation. This is when you directly see the path to freedom, not just intellectually, but with your whole being.
So it's not just a concept anymore. It's a lived reality.
Exactly. You're not just reading the map, you're walking the path.
Mhm.
And with that comes this profound sense of certainty, of confidence in the teachings.
It's like the pieces of the puzzle are finally clicking into place.
The text describes the stage as the arising and vanishing of formations. And this is where you see the entire process of dependent origination, that intricate web of cause and effect that leads to suffering. You're seeing it play out in your own experience.
You're seeing how your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, how they're all interconnected and how they contribute to this cycle of suffering.
But you're also seeing that path to liberation from that cycle, the path of letting go, of non-attachment. It's unfolding right before your eyes.
So it's not just about seeing the problem, it's also about seeing the solution.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that the text doesn't lay out this rigid timeline for these stages of insight. The process is unique for each individual, like a fingerprint.
So more like a journey with many paths, all winding their way to the same destination.
That's a wonderful way to put it. And of course, there will be setbacks, there will be challenges along the way. You might have moments of doubt. You might even fall back into old patterns of thinking and behaving. It's like learning to ride a bike. There will be some wobbles and falls along the way.
Right, but that doesn't mean we give up.
Exactly. The key is to keep practicing, to keep cultivating both concentration and discernment. Keep returning to the breath and the teachings.
So it's about staying committed to that path, even when it feels challenging or frustrating. It's about trusting that the process will lead us to liberation, even if it takes time and effort. What advice does the text offer for navigating those inevitable challenges?
Well, it emphasizes finding a skilled teacher, someone who's walked the path themselves,
Right.
and can offer guidance and support. It's like having a mountain guide, to help you through treacherous terrain.
That makes sense. It's always helpful to have someone who can share their wisdom and experience, especially when you're hitting those obstacles. What else does the text suggest?
It talks about surrounding yourself with a supportive community, like fellow practitioners, people who are also committed to the path. It's like having a group of hikers encouraging and supporting each other along the way.
Because it's easier when you're not traveling alone.
Exactly.
Sharing that journey with like-minded people can bring a sense of belonging and inspiration.
You're right. We've talked about the intellectual and experiential aspects of discernment, but there's another dimension that's equally important.
Okay, what's that?
The ethical dimension,
Okay.
which is about aligning your actions with your understanding of the Dhamma.
It's about living a life that embodies those qualities of wisdom and compassion in a real, tangible way.
Exactly. It's not just about what you think or believe, it's about how you live, how you treat yourself and others.
So walking the walk, not just talking the talk. What does ethical discernment look like in practice?
The text emphasizes cultivating certain virtues,
Okay.
like generosity, kindness, patience, forgiveness.
Right.
These qualities are like fertile soil where the seeds of concentration and discernment can really flourish.
So it's like we're creating this positive feedback loop
Right.
where our actions actually strengthen our understanding, which then inspires us to act in more skillful, compassionate ways.
Exactly. And as we cultivate these virtues, we start to weaken the grip of greed, hatred, and delusion, those root causes of suffering.
So ethical discernment isn't about following a rigid set of rules. It's about transforming our hearts and minds.
Yes.
making them more receptive to wisdom and compassion.
Precisely. And the text suggests that this transformation happens gradually through consistent practice, through being mindful of our thoughts, words, and actions.
It's like tending a garden, weeding out those harmful habits and nourishing the wholesome ones.
That's a beautiful analogy. And the text reminds us that this journey of transformation, it's not about achieving some distant goal. It's about finding freedom and peace in the present moment,
Okay.
in the midst of everyday life.
It's about waking up to the beauty and wonder of life right here, right now, rather than waiting for some future state of perfection.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really interesting point the text makes about the role of joy and delight in this process of discernment.
Joy and delight. That doesn't sound like something you typically associate with Buddhism, which often emphasizes discipline and self-control.
I know, it might seem counterintuitive, but the text explains that as you develop those deeper levels of concentration and insight, you naturally start to experience greater joy and delight.
Oh.
It's like this hidden spring bubbling up from within.
So it's not this superficial or fleeting joy.
No.
It arises from this deep understanding of the nature of reality, from the freedom that comes with letting go of attachment and the illusion of self.
Precisely. This joy is seen as an essential support for the path, like a refreshing breeze on a long journey.
Right.
It helps to sustain your practice, it keeps you moving forward, even when things get tough.
Because when you're experiencing joy and delight, it's easier to face those challenges with equanimity and grace, right?
Exactly.
You've got this wellspring of inner strength to draw on.
And the text also emphasizes that this joy isn't something you have to strive for or force.
Right.
It arises naturally as a byproduct of cultivating wisdom and compassion, like a flower blooming in the sunshine.
So it's about creating the right conditions for joy to spontaneously arise.
Exactly. We've covered a lot in our exploration of discernment today, from those intellectual and experiential dimensions to the ethical implications and that surprising role of joy.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, but it's important to remember this is just a glimpse into this vast and profound dimension of Buddhist practice.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a taste of that transformative power of discernment and inspired you to keep exploring this path on your own.
It certainly has for me. But before we wrap up this section on discernment, what stood out to you the most in our conversation?
That's a great question. For me, the most striking aspect of discernment is that emphasis on both wisdom and compassion.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? They're often seen as these separate qualities, but the text presents them as two sides of the same coin.
Like you can't have true wisdom without compassion, and you can't have true compassion without wisdom.
And the cultivation of both those qualities is essential for the journey of awakening.
Absolutely. Now, how about you? What really resonated with you from our discussion?
I was really captivated by that idea of equanimity towards formations. It's such a powerful concept.
You mean the ability to see all experiences, pleasant or unpleasant, as simply arising and passing away without judgment, without attachment?
Exactly. It sounds like this truly liberating state of mind.
Yeah, one where you're no longer tossed about by the waves of experience.
It is a profound shift in perspective. And what's amazing, it's not some distant goal only for advanced meditators. It's something we can all cultivate, moment by moment, in our everyday lives, just by paying attention to the ebb and flow of our experience.
That's a powerful takeaway.
Right.
Well, I think we've thoroughly explored the realm of discernment for now. Are you ready to move on to the final part of our deep dive?
Absolutely. I'm eager to see how all these pieces we've been exploring, conviction, concentration, discernment, how they all fit together to reveal that complete picture of the path to awakening. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've explored conviction, we've explored concentration, and we just finished a deep dive into discernment. Now, how about we tie it all together?
It's like we've gathered all the ingredients, now we're ready to bake that cake, that awakening cake.
I love that analogy. As we've been going through these different aspects of the path, the thing that really strikes me is just how practical these teachings are.
Yeah, it's not just philosophy, it's about transforming your life, like right here, right now.
The text really emphasizes that even subtle shifts in perspective, when they're fueled by discernment, can have a huge impact on your actions, on your relationships. It's like adjusting the lens on a camera. Suddenly, everything comes into focus.
Yeah.
You see the world differently, you see yourself differently with more clarity and compassion, and that leads to making better choices, naturally.
And then those skillful choices end up strengthening our concentration and discernment, so it's like this beautiful upward spiral.
It is. It's a virtuous cycle, each element supporting and reinforcing the others. It reminds me of that quote by the Dalai Lama. He said, "Happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions."
Ooh, I like that. So we're not just passively waiting for happiness to happen to us. We're actively creating it through our thoughts, words, and actions.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of equanimity toward formations, which we touched on earlier. It's a big theme in Wings to Awakening.
Yeah, that ability to just observe all those experiences, the pleasant ones, the unpleasant ones, as they're arising and passing away without getting caught up in the drama of it all.
Exactly. And the text suggests that this ability to cultivate equanimity, it directly comes from understanding the three marks of existence.
Impermanence, suffering, or stress, and not self.
That's it.
So as we see those truths playing out in our own lives, we see that constant change, that flow of experience. That's when equanimity starts to really take root.
It's like that saying, you are not the waves, you are the ocean. You experience the waves, but you're not tossed around by them.
That is such a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it's reassuring to know that equanimity doesn't mean becoming apathetic or indifferent.
No, not at all.
It's not about checking out of life or shutting down emotionally. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah. It's about being fully engaged, but in a more skillful, more compassionate way.
And as our attachment to a separate self weakens, our compassion for others, it naturally expands, right?
Right. We begin to see how interconnected everything is. We're all on this journey together with all its ups and downs.
It reminds me of that saying, joy shared is joy doubled, sorrow shared is sorrow halved.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And as we cultivate discernment, as we deepen our understanding of impermanence and not self, it naturally makes us reevaluate our priorities.
It's like looking at our lives through a fresh set of eyes and asking ourselves, what really matters? What's truly worth pursuing?
Exactly. And the text suggests that this kind of questioning leads to a profound shift in values.
Yeah. So we start to prioritize things like kindness, compassion, and wisdom over material possessions, fleeting pleasures. We realize true happiness doesn't come from external things. It comes from within.
Right, genuine happiness. It arises from a peaceful and compassionate heart and mind, not from accumulating stuff or chasing experiences.
And as we align our lives with those values, we embody wisdom and compassion in our actions, our relationships. We naturally create a more peaceful, harmonious world around us. It's like this ripple effect spreading outwards from our own hearts.
Beautifully said. It highlights how interconnected our inner world and outer world are.
Yeah.
Our own transformation contributes to the collective well-being of everyone.
And this actually highlights, I think, one of the most beautiful and inspiring things about the Buddhist path. It's not just about your personal liberation. It's about creating a better world.
It calls us to wake up to that interconnectedness of all things, to recognize that we're all in this together.
And that realization, even amidst all the difficulties we might face, can be a source of immense hope and inspiration. We're going to be looking at some pretty interesting Buddhist concepts.
Yeah.
Equanimity and right view. And when you hear equanimity, you probably think calmness.
Definitely.
It's this sort of peaceful state of mind. But we're going to see that it's a lot more dynamic.
Yeah.
A lot more powerful than that.
For sure.
It's almost like mental weight training, but for navigating all of life's experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about just passively accepting whatever happens.
Right.
It's about actively developing a mental skill.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So to dive into this, we've got excerpts from Buddhist texts that focus on, meditation practices.
Yeah.
Analyzing different emotional states, and even exploring how this right view thing can lead to awakening.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is how practical these teachings are.
Right.
They offer real, tangible techniques for dealing with the ups and downs of life.
Okay.
Like it's a toolkit for the mind.
All right, sign me up. So let's start with this idea of a spectrum of equanimity.
Okay.
The text describes two types. One is just this kind of neutral feeling, but the one we're really going to focus on is called even-mindedness.
Right, and that's where the skill part comes in.
Okay.
Even-mindedness isn't something that you just have or don't have. It's a capacity you build through practice.
Yeah.
And it applies to everything, not just the tough stuff. We're talking about how you face pleasure pain, things you're drawn to, and even things you dislike.
Hold on. Things you like, things you dislike. It's pretty broad. Could you unpack that a little?
Absolutely. Think of it in terms of any mental object that arises. So a thought, a feeling, a physical sensation. Each of these can be agreeable or disagreeable to us.
Okay.
Equanimity is that skill that helps you meet all of these experiences with that same balanced mind regardless of whether they're pleasant or unpleasant.
So it's not about shutting off our feelings,
Right.
but about changing how we relate to them.
Exactly.
That's a pretty cool idea.
It is a crucial point.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The text actually suggests that there's a skillful way to relate to distress.
Distress being a good thing. That's not something you hear every day. I need to hear more about this.
Well, one of the excerpts, paragraph 179 to be specific,
Okay.
suggests that the distress you might feel from not reaching enlightenment, that kind of deep yearning,
Yeah.
can actually be stronger than the distress of missing out on, say, some fleeting sensory pleasure.
Whoa. Okay. That's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. So if I'm bummed out about not living up to my full potential, it can help me get over being upset about smaller, less important things.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
It's like a total shift in priorities. Instead of getting caught up in the little things, that bad commute,
Yeah.
the annoying email,
Right.
that deeper longing for something more, can it help you redirect your energy towards actual growth, towards the path of awakening?
Now that's a perspective I can get behind. I mean, honestly, I get caught up in those small annoyances.
Yeah.
But this idea of tapping into a deeper yearning,
Yeah.
it feels pretty empowering.
Like, okay, that traffic jam was annoying,
Right.
but I have bigger fish to fry.
And that's the beauty of these teachings. They offer these incredibly practical tools for reframing our experience, shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
It's like seeing the world through a new lens.
All right, so we've established that even distress can be helpful on this path, but how do we actually cultivate this renunciation equanimity the text talks about? Paragraph 179 mentions these different types of joy distress and even equanimity, and they're labeled either household or renunciation.
Right.
What's the difference between those?
That's a key distinction.
Okay.
These categories point to different levels of experience.
Okay, lay it on me.
Think of household as the more basic everyday level. Here, the joy, the distress, or even the equanimity you experience is directly tied to external things you know. Gaining or losing possessions.
Okay.
The ups and downs of your sensory world. It's very much about how those things make you feel. So like being ecstatic about getting a new gadget or feeling bummed that your favorite team lost. Those are all household level reactions.
Precisely. Now, renunciation, on the other hand, operates on a deeper level.
Oh.
The joy and distress here arise from a completely different source. It's about understanding the impermanent nature of things and focusing on spiritual goals.
So instead of being totally absorbed by what's happening to me,
Right.
it's more about understanding how those experiences fit into the bigger picture.
You got it. And the text suggests we use these higher forms of joy and distress to actually transcend the more basic ones. It's like using those deeper understandings to free yourself from getting constantly swept away by the ups and downs of everyday life.
Okay.
It ultimately leads us towards that renunciation equanimity.
Okay. Start to see how this is like mental training.
Yeah.
But it can't be easy to just switch to that higher level.
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
The texts actually use these incredibly vivid metaphors to help us visualize equanimity in action.
You're talking about those descriptions in paragraphs 180 and 181, right?
Yeah.
The ones comparing equanimity to earth, water, fire, and wind.
Exactly.
Those really jumped out at me.
Yeah.
They're so powerful and almost poetic.
They bring these concepts to life in a way that pure philosophy sometimes doesn't. They
Right.
give you something concrete to grasp,
Okay.
a way to tune your mind to this new way of being.
Yeah, I get it. Like picturing the earth solid and unmoved, no matter what gets thrown at it. That's such a great image for equanimity.
Right?
But can we unpack a couple more of those metaphors? I want to understand the nuances.
Of course. Let's take water, for example.
Okay.
Paragraph 180 describes how water cleanses anything washed in it, whether it's clean or dirty, without being repulsed or bothered by it.
So it's about acceptance and letting go, right?
Yeah.
Not getting hung up on judging or pushing away what we dislike.
Exactly. And then there's the metaphor of fire. Imagine a fire that burns everything equally,
Uh,
whether it's valuable or worthless, with no preference or judgment.
So equanimity is like that all-consuming fire, burning away all of our attachments and aversions.
Such a potent image, isn't it? It gets right to the heart of what equanimity is all about.
It really does. You know, it's fascinating how relevant these visualizations still are today.
Yeah.
I mean, so many modern mindfulness techniques use visualizations. It's like this ancient wisdom is timeless and universally applicable.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the power of these teachings. They offer us these timeless tools for understanding the complexities of our minds and navigating the human experience.
So we've got these vivid metaphors for cultivating equanimity. But it's not like you just snap your fingers and suddenly become a master of even-mindedness, right?
You're absolutely right. Paragraph 181 actually outlines 3 distinct stages of mastery, and it's definitely a process. It takes practice and dedication.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these stages. What are they?
The first stage is called conscious development.
Oh.
This is where you're actively, mindfully choosing equanimity. Whenever you encounter those agreeable or disagreeable things we were talking about, it takes effort.
Right. But you're making a conscious choice to shift your perspective.
So if I'm, let's say, super frustrated about being stuck in traffic,
Yeah.
I can recognize that frustration and try to intentionally move to a more balanced perspective.
Precisely.
It's like catching yourself in the act and making a different choice.
And as you practice that conscious effort, leads to the second stage.
Okay.
Spontaneous disillusionment. This is where you start to see through the allure or the threat of those experiences more naturally. Almost automatically, they lose their power over you. It becomes less of a struggle.
So instead of being completely swept away by that frustration in traffic, I might still notice it arise.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have that same intense grip on me. It's
Right.
like I'd be less reactive,
Yeah.
more calm in the face of those everyday annoyances.
You're getting it. And finally, we have the third stage.
Okay.
Fully developed faculties. At this point, you've developed such mastery over your mind that you can actually choose how you perceive things. You're no longer at the mercy of your reactions. It's true freedom. Wow. That sounds incredibly liberating. It's like reaching a level of inner peace that nothing can shake. But I have to ask,
Yeah.
what does that even look like in real life? Can you give me some concrete examples of these stages in action?
Absolutely. Let's say you're at work
Okay.
and you get passed over for a promotion.
Ooh, yeah, I think we've all been there at some point.
In that first stage, conscious development,
Okay.
you'd probably feel that initial sting of disappointment, that household distress we talked about.
Yeah.
But you'd make a conscious effort to put it into perspective.
Okay.
You might remind yourself that your self-worth isn't defined by this one promotion, that there are other opportunities out there, and you could choose to shift your focus to those instead.
Okay. That's a healthy way to approach it.
All right.
But it definitely sounds like it takes effort.
It does now imagine that same scenario,
Okay.
but you're in the second stage, spontaneous disillusionment.
Right.
You might still feel a flicker of disappointment, but it wouldn't consume you. You'd be able to recognize it as a passing emotion and not let it derail your whole day.
So you're not suppressing your feelings.
Right.
You're just not letting them take over.
Exactly. And now picture that same situation.
Okay.
But from the perspective of someone with fully developed faculties, they might see the promotion as a completely neutral event. They might even choose to see it as a chance to grow in a different direction.
Right.
Maybe explore a new path. Their inner peace wouldn't be contingent on those external outcomes.
Wow, that's next level mastery. To be that unshakable, that's incredible.
It is, and it shows you the power of this practice, the power of equanimity. But there's another nuance to this that I find fascinating.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Remember how paragraph 179 mentioned equanimity dependent on multiplicity and equanimity dependent on singleness?
Oh yeah, that part kind of tripped me up. What's the difference between those?
This is where we start to dive into some of the finer points of these teachings.
Okay.
Singleness refers to the highly focused state of jhana, which is a very deep state of meditative absorption. It's like reaching a level of concentration where your mind is entirely unified, free from distractions.
So if I'm understanding this correctly,
Yeah.
even the activity going on inside our minds,
Uh-huh.
all those thoughts and sensations,
Right.
can be a distraction from true equanimity. That's pretty wild.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this takes us to the concept of non-fashioning, mentioned in paragraph 182.
Okay, color me intrigued. What is non-fashion?
It's essentially a state where even jhana, that deep meditative state we just talked about, is seen as something fabricated, something constructed, and ultimately transcended. It's like going beyond even the subtlest fabrications of the mind.
So even a highly focused state of mind
Right.
is still, in a way, something we've created. And we can go beyond even that.
Exactly. In the state of non-fashioning,
Huh.
the mind is so incredibly balanced that it no longer contributes to creating further experiences. It's complete stillness, total non-reactivity.
Let's get pretty deep.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this progression from basic equanimity in our everyday lives to deeper equanimity in meditation, and ultimately to this complete transcendence of all those constructed experiences. It's like an inward journey.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and it's a journey that's available to everyone. It's just a matter of putting in the effort and the practice.
Okay, all this talk of equanimity and non-fashioning makes me think about the image of the awakened teacher,
Hmm.
described at the end of paragraph 179. They talk about these three frames of reference for the teacher. Why are those important?
That's a very insightful connection. What these frames of reference illustrate is that true equanimity is not about cold indifference.
Okay.
The awakened teacher still feels sympathy. They still want to help others.
Right.
But their own inner peace doesn't depend on how those others respond.
So it's like they're fully present and engaged with the world, but they're not attached to specific outcomes. That must be an incredibly freeing way to live.
It is. Imagine offering your teachings freely, without your own happiness or well-being, depending on whether those teachings are accepted or rejected.
Yeah.
That's true equanimity in action.
That's such a powerful image. It reminds me of the idea of non-attachment we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Sounds incredibly difficult to actually live that way.
Yeah.
But also incredibly liberating.
It's both. Absolutely. And it speaks to the transformative power of these teachings.
Right.
They offer a path to a kind of freedom that goes beyond our usual ways of thinking and being in the world.
All right, so we've delved pretty deep into equanimity. But what about this right view idea that keeps popping up? What makes it so important in this whole picture of awakening?
That's a great question, and right view is absolutely essential because it lays the groundwork for everything else.
Okay.
It's defined in the texts as the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths: suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering.
Okay.
But it's not just about having an intellectual grasp of these concepts.
So it's more than just knowing the facts.
Exactly. It's about seeing reality as it is, in a way that leads to a decrease in craving, and ultimately to liberation.
But wouldn't that be a kind of paradox? If right view is about seeing reality clearly, how does that lead to detaching from all views, including itself?
That's a brilliant observation. And it goes right to the heart of what makes right view so unique.
Okay.
It's a view that ultimately undermines itself, leading you to a state that transcends all views.
So it's like a ladder that you kick away once you've climbed it.
That's a perfect analogy. And this is absolute key to reaching that non-fashioning we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It's about transcending even the most subtle mental constructs.
This is heavy stuff. So we have right view as this essential foundation for understanding reality, but it's not the final destination.
Right.
It's a stepping stone to something even more profound.
Exactly. And the story of Anathapattika in paragraph 187 really brings this to life.
Yeah,
Do you remember that one?
totally. He's debating with all these other wanderers, each with their own strong opinions about the universe and the self.
Right.
It's like a philosophical battle royale.
Right. And what's so clever is how Anathapattika uses their own words against them.
Yeah.
He points out how each of their views is fabricated,
Yeah.
impermanent, and ultimately a source of stress.
And then he basically drops the mic by saying that he sees all viewpoints, including his own, in exactly the same way. It's not about being right or wrong. He's just pointing to the nature of all views, including his own.
Right. He's embodying right view in action. By not clinging to any specific perspective,
Okay.
he's able to see a higher escape, which is that state of non-fashioning we were discussing.
It's such a brilliant illustration of how right view leads to deeper understanding and a more peaceful way of being. It's not about winning arguments.
Right.
It's about seeing past them entirely.
And what I find even more fascinating is that this same principle of impermanence that Anathapattika uses to deconstruct those viewpoints
Yeah.
operates on multiple levels.
You're talking about that scale invariance idea you mentioned, right?
Exactly. It's this idea that the same pattern, arising, persisting, and ceasing, applies not just to our individual thoughts or emotions,
Okay.
but to vast cosmic processes as well.
My mind is officially blown. That level of interconnectedness is pretty awe-inspiring. But why does understanding this matter? How does it actually impact our lives?
That's the key question. Recognizing this pattern, the scale invariance,
Yeah.
actually gives us agency.
Okay.
It shows us that if our actions are perpetuating the cycle of suffering,
Right.
both on a personal level and on a larger scale, we have the power to choose differently.
So it's not just about passively observing impermanence.
Right.
It's about understanding how our choices actively shape that constant process of arising and ceasing.
Precisely. And that understanding that shift in perspective is what ultimately leads to liberation.
Good.
It's the key to breaking free from the patterns that keep us trapped in suffering.
Whoa, that's a powerful insight. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
I want to make sure our listeners are following along.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways?
Where I think the most important thing to remember is that equanimity and right view aren't just abstract concepts. They're practical tools for living a more skillful life.
Right, and they challenge us to rethink how we usually react to things.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that distress could be a helpful tool,
Hmm.
or that even our strongest convictions are ultimately impermanent,
It's all about shifting our perspective,
Yeah.
seeing things through a different lens.
and ultimately recognizing that we have the power to choose how we engage with the world, both internally and externally.
Absolute. That's a really empowering message.
It is, but there's one thing I'm still wrestling with.
Okay.
You mentioned that even our most cherished views are ultimately impermanent. If that's true, then what does that actually mean for our sense of self? What happens when the ground beneath our feet starts to shift like that?
That's a profound question. It challenges us to examine who we think we are at the deepest level.
It almost feels like the rug is being pulled out from under us.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe letting go of those rigid ideas about ourselves opens us up to something new, something even more authentic.
That's a beautiful way to frame it, and it brings to mind another important point from the texts.
Yeah.
This journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about realizing our true nature, the essence of who we already are.
Okay, I'm following you.
Uh,
So it's not about striving to achieve some ideal version of ourselves,
Right.
but about uncovering something that's already there, hidden beneath all the layers.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of awakening comes in.
Okay.
It's about waking up to the reality of who we truly are, beyond all the labels and stories we create about ourselves.
That sounds incredibly liberating. But if we're letting go of all those ideas we have about ourselves,
Yeah.
what's left? Who are we without all those stories we tell ourselves?
Now that's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
And the texts don't offer a simple answer, because ultimately it's something that has to be directly experienced, not just conceptualized.
So it's more of a journey of discovery than a destination.
Precisely. And it's a journey that's unique to each individual. There's no one-size-fits-all map to awakening, but we can explore the tools that can help us along the way. Exactly. It's about finding what works for you and allows you to tap into your own unique path.
That makes a lot of sense. But if there's no fixed map, how do we even get started on this journey? What are some of the tools or practices that can point us in the right direction?
Well, we've already touched on equanimity and right view,
Yeah.
and those are foundational, for sure. But the texts also place a lot of emphasis on mindfulness, ethical conduct, and of course, meditation.
Okay, let's unpack those a little bit.
We've explored equanimity in depth, but how does mindfulness fit into this whole picture of awakening?
Mindfulness is all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
It's about observing your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations as they come up,
Right.
but without getting swept away by them. So it's like cultivating that awareness we were talking about earlier,
Right.
that ability to notice your reactions without letting them control you.
Right.
It's like being the observer of your own mind.
You got it. And that awareness is essential for breaking free from those habitual patterns that keep us stuck in those cycles of suffering.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful. But what about ethical conduct? What role does that play in this journey of awakening?
Ethical conduct is about acting in ways that are skillful and beneficial, both for yourself and for others.
Okay.
It's about aligning your actions with your values and cultivating qualities like kindness, compassion, and generosity.
So it's not just about inner transformation.
Oh, right.
It's also about how that transformation manifests in the world and how we treat others.
Exactly, because our actions always have consequences for ourselves and everyone around us.
Right.
And by choosing to act skillfully, we create a more positive and harmonious environment for everyone to thrive in.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it?
Mm.
Our actions create these ripples that spread outwards, impacting the whole web of existence.
Precisely. And those ripples can be incredibly powerful, both in positive and negative ways.
Right.
So choosing to act ethically becomes really important when you see how interconnected everything is.
That makes so much sense. So we've got mindfulness and ethical conduct as these really important pillars of this path. But what about meditation? Where did that fit into the equation?
Meditation is an incredibly powerful tool for cultivating mindfulness, concentration, and insight.
Okay.
It's about training your mind to be more focused, stable, and clear.
So it's like a mental workout, but instead of building muscles, we're strengthening our attention and awareness.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of meditation, and there are so many different types of meditation,
Right.
each with its own unique benefits.
That's what I was curious about. Could you give me some examples? What are some different types of meditation that people can explore?
Sure. One common type is called samatha vipassana meditation. It combines practices for developing both concentration and insight. Concentration practices like focusing on your breath
Right.
help you calm and stabilize your mind.
So it's about quieting down that constant mental chatter.
Yeah.
and creating a sense of inner stillness.
Exactly. And once the mind is more settled, it becomes easier to develop insight,
Okay.
which is the ability to see things clearly, as they really are, without all the mental clutter.
It's like clearing away all the fog and confusion, so you can
Yeah.
see reality with more clarity and precision.
That's a great way to put it, and that clarity is crucial for understanding the nature of suffering and the path that leads to liberation.
So there are these different flavors of meditation, some that focus on calming the mind, some that cultivate insight, and some that weave both approaches together. It seems like there's a whole world to explore.
There really is, and there are so many different traditions and teachers offering guidance and support along the way.
Right.
The key is finding a practice that resonates with you, that speaks to your individual needs and supports your unique journey.
I love that it reinforces the idea that there's no one right way to do this. There are many paths that can lead to awakening. It's about finding what works for you.
Absolutely, and that's a very hopeful message, wouldn't you say? It means this journey is open to everyone, regardless of their background beliefs
Yeah.
or current circumstances.
It is a hopeful message, but I'm also curious.
Yeah.
Are there challenges or obstacles that people might encounter along the way? I imagine it can't all be smooth sailing.
You're right, it's not always easy. This is a challenging journey, and there will definitely be ups and downs. One common obstacle is doubt.
Okay.
Questioning whether this path is even possible, whether you are capable of awakening.
That makes sense. It's a big leap of faith to believe that we can change our minds and our lives in such a fundamental way.
It is, and that's why it's so important to find support along the way from teachers, from community, from the teachings themselves.
Right.
Those sources of inspiration and guidance can really help you stay the course when things get tough.
It's about finding those anchors that can hold you steady when the seas get rough.
That's a great way to put it. And it's also about being patient and compassionate with yourself.
Yeah.
This is a process, and it takes time and effort.
It's like learning any new skill you have to be willing to fumble and make mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And that's where mindfulness comes in.
Oh.
By paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and actions. You can catch yourself when you're starting to head down a path. That leads to more suffering.
Right.
You can course correct and make a different choice.
It's like having this internal compass that keeps you oriented and helps you navigate back to the path when you inevitably veer off course.
I love that metaphor. And the more you practice mindfulness, the more sensitive that compass becomes.
This is all starting to click for me, but I'm still curious about what specific benefits people might experience from engaging in these practices. What are the real-world fruits of this journey of awakening?
Well, the texts describe many different benefits, both those that impact our everyday lives and those that are more, shall we say, transcendental. On an everyday level, people often report experiencing greater peace, happiness, and overall well-being.
So it's not just some abstract, far-off goal. It can actually have a positive impact on our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. And on a deeper level, these practices can lead to a profound sense of freedom and liberation from the cycles of suffering that keep us trapped.
Right, that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To break free from those patterns of suffering that cause us so much pain.
It is, and it's a goal that's attainable for anyone who's willing to put in the effort.
This has been such an incredible conversation. We've covered so much ground, from equanimity and right view to the practical aspects of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and meditation. And we've even touched on the challenges and benefits of this whole journey of awakening.
It's been a really rich exploration, and I hope it encourages our listeners to keep learning and exploring these ideas on their own.
Me too. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, this concept of scale and variance. How those same patterns of arising, persisting, and ceasing show up on both the personal and cosmic levels. It's such a mind-bending idea, and I'm wondering if you could unpack that a bit more for us. What are the implications of truly grasping this interconnectedness?
That's a profound question, and recognizing this scale and variance, this interconnectedness of all things, can be a truly transformative experience. It can lead to a profound shift in perspective, a sense of awe and wonder at the vastness and complexity of the universe. And it can awaken a deep appreciation for the preciousness of every single moment.
It's like seeing the world with fresh eyes, recognizing that invisible web that connects us all.
Exactly. And that realization can inspire a sense of responsibility. And understanding that our actions have consequences not just for ourselves, but for all beings.
So it goes beyond just seeking personal liberation. It becomes about contributing to the well-being of the whole.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. that our individual actions ripple outward, impacting the entire web of life.
That brings us back to the importance of ethical conduct, doesn't it?
It does.
It becomes less about rules and more about understanding the interconnectedness of all things.
Because understanding this interconnectedness can lead to a more compassionate and altruistic way of being in the world.
Yeah.
It naturally guides you towards actions that benefit everyone.
So it's not about withdrawing from the world, but about engaging with it
Yeah.
in a more skillful and beneficial way.
That's it. It's about recognizing that our own happiness and well-being are inextricably linked to the well-being of all beings.
This is really hitting home for me. It's like this journey of awakening is not just about personal transformation. It's also about a deeper understanding of our place in the universe and our responsibility to all beings. It's about recognizing that we're all connected in this incredible web of life.
Beautifully said. It is a journey filled with both challenges and rewards. But ultimately, it's a path that leads toward greater freedom, wisdom, and compassion.
This has been such an incredible deep dive, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of these incredibly profound teachings.
There's always more to explore.
Right.
And I think we've given our listeners a solid foundation to build upon.
Absolutely. No, before we move on, there's one more idea I want to touch on. You mentioned earlier that jhana is a state of deep meditative absorption. It seems like that would be a really valuable tool for cultivating equanimity, right?
Absolutely. Jhana is a powerful state of mental focus and clarity.
Okay.
The texts describe it as a state of profound stillness and rapture. It's like all the mental noise quiets down and you experience a deep sense of peace and well-being.
Okay, I can see how that would be incredibly helpful for developing equanimity.
Okay.
But how do you actually get there? What are the steps involved in reaching jhana?
Well, the first step is to find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed.
Okay.
It's important to be able to sit comfortably and focus your attention without distractions.
So no multitasking while trying to reach jhana.
Not exactly. Multitasking is pretty much the opposite of what we're aiming for here.
Right.
The key is to choose a meditation object. Something simple and easily accessible like your breath. And gently guide your attention back to that object whenever it wanders.
It sounds like it takes a lot of discipline and mental focus.
It does, but as you practice, you'll find that your mind gradually becomes more settled and concentrated. Eventually, you'll start to experience those deeper states of absorption that are characteristic of jhana.
So it's a gradual process like training a muscle.
Exactly. And as you continue to practice, you'll find that those states of absorption become more accessible and easier to maintain.
That's encouraging. But I have to ask, what does reaching jhana actually feel like? Is it like a blissful high?
It can be quite blissful,
Okay.
but it's not quite like a fleeting high that comes and goes. It's more like a deep sense of peace and contentment that pervades your entire being.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It is, but it's important to remember that jhana is not the end goal.
Okay.
It's a powerful tool for cultivating equanimity and insight,
Right.
but ultimately it's meant to be transcended.
Right. You mentioned earlier that even jhana is considered a fabricated state.
That's right. It's still a conditioned experience,
Okay.
something that arises and passes away. The ultimate goal is to go beyond all conditioned experiences, to reach a state of complete liberation that's free from all limitations.
Okay. That makes sense. But honestly, it's hard to even imagine what that would be like.
It's beyond our ordinary ways of thinking and perceiving.
Yeah.
But the texts assure us that it's possible
Yeah.
and that the path to liberation is open to all of us.
This has been such a mind-expanding conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about equanimity review and the path to awakening.
Me too. And I hope it's inspired our listeners to continue exploring these ideas and incorporating them into their own lives.
Absolutely, because ultimately these teachings aren't just about philosophy. They're about living a more skillful and meaningful life.
Right. They offer practical tools for navigating the ups and downs of human experience and for cultivating greater peace, wisdom, and compassion.
Well said. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
It's been a pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time as we continue to explore these fascinating and transformative ideas.